We've been looking in the mornings on the prayers of the Lord Jesus. And one of the things I pointed out, that there are occasions where he just seemed to disappear. I don't mean vanish, that he's there in substance and then gone, but he had this wonderful way of just stepping back and the crowd really not noticing that he's made his way. And one of those situations perhaps is John 7, John 8. There's been a real hullabaloo at the end of John 7. Poor old Nicodemus has stuck his head up for the first time to make a stand for the Lord Jesus. And they give him both barrels, he just sticks his head up and says, well, surely under our law we cannot condemn a man until he's proven guilty. And they turned, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin council just turned on him, and all barrels just went towards him, and he quickly got his head back down out of the way again. You don't blame him. Can't blame him. And it says that every man, in that horrid atmosphere, every man went to his own house. But Jesus went up to the Mount of Olives. And doesn't say he made his way into Bethany, where he would normally go. If he was in Jerusalem, he'd make his way to Lazarus' house with Mary and Martha, his sisters. It just says that he stayed on the Mount of Olives, which would really, when you go through the Gospels, it infers that something is going on. And I wonder, because we find on a few occasions since we've been going through the Gospel of John, he seems to know what's coming up in front of him, the situations that develop. And for instance, when he met Nathanael, he knew all about Nathanael before Nathanael ever came within speaking distance of him. And I wonder if this is what he prayed, knowing full well what was coming the next day, whilst he was up there on the mountain. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring your love. Where there is injury, your pardon, Lord. And where there is doubt, true faith in you. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is despair in life, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, only light. Where there is sadness, ever joy. Make me a channel of your peace. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned, in giving to all men that we receive, and in dying that we are born to eternal life. O Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all my soul. The day began ever so sweetly. You would want a day to begin like this, I suppose, in one sense. In verse 1 it says, after the night on Mount Olivet, it says very early in the morning. The New King James put it in the margin, in the area there, very early in the morning. He loved to get up in the morning. I said, no, Nita, can 5 in the morning, it's well done. That's no territory, I know for you. But very early in the morning, he came down into the city, went into the temple, and all came to him. And he sat down and taught them. What a way to begin the day. No stress. Just sitting there listening to him speak. A little later, on another feast day, we read of him coming into the temple, and the blind and the lame come to him, and he healed them, it says. And then he goes on to say, and the children cried out. The children cried out, Hosanna to the Son of David. Hosanna means save, Lord. Save, Lord. O Son of David, will you save? What a way to begin. The temple functioning as it ought to function. Someone standing there with a Bible in hand, perhaps, just sat down and they're speaking to the congregation, and he teaches them. What a sweet way to begin the day. The atmosphere prevailing. When he's in Simon Peter's house with Andrew, and he's giving that Bible study, and then it says, and the presence of the Lord was there, or the power of the Lord was there to heal. Such atmospheres could pervade the gatherings where he would be. No coldness, no no deadness of spirit. The atmosphere will be alive, people listening to what's being said. I don't mean everybody, perhaps. You can't get everybody to listen in that manner. But we find that when Jesus spoke, people sat up and listened. The Bible tells us that he didn't raise his voice, and yet he could speak to thousands right on the seashore line and up into the mountain. He would be able to speak and they'd hear his voice. When you shout down towards the sea, try and get your kids or your grandchildren or your brothers or your sisters to hear your voice. They never seem to hear you. But turn your back on the sea and bring your voice forward that way. The Methodists were experts in understanding of the acoustics. And they would find in Cornwall and in Wales and in England, they'd find those little gullies where they could speak. And people like Whitfield could hold a congregation of 10,000. How do you do that without a microphone? Yeah. How do you do it? When Daniel Rowlands would be there over in West Wales and hold a congregation of 5,000, and they'd be hanging on the edge just to listen to him, to catch what he's having to say. It's a marvelous thing, that the atmosphere can be so filled that you could hear a pin drop. Just listening for what the Master has to say. And into that very atmosphere comes this group of men, scribes and Pharisees, and they thrust this woman into the midst. And the atmosphere is broken straight away. The Holy Spirit is a very sensitive, tender. He's as powerful as they come, man. But he is so sensitive, so tender. And there's almost this, the atmosphere has changed. Suddenly now there's venom in the air. Suddenly now there's shame. Well, we would assume there's shame here for the woman being caught in the act that she was caught in. Certainly with it, fear. Then that great enemy of true religion, I suppose, curiosity. What's happening here? And so we find this, Jesus is sat, and you find him a little bit like Moses. He sat 1 second, and then he's up. Then he's stooping again, then he's up. Then he stoops again, then he's up again. He's up and down all the time. He sat teaching them. It's a very relaxed atmosphere. And as the interruption comes into the arena, the Sadducees or scribes and Pharisees, they bring this woman into the midst, and with venom in their voice, they said, "We caught this woman in the very act of adultery. Now Moses under the law commanded such to be stoned. But what do you say concerning her?" This they said, testing him. How do you bring mercy and truth together? Do you have to bend it somehow, in some way, to bring them both together? Is it possible for righteousness and peace to kiss each other? That's what the psalmist talks about in Psalm 85. And here in this situation we find Jesus stood now, hearing what these men have just, the absolute venom that was in their voice. They have no interest in the woman. No interest at all. They have no interest in what the people might think or say. They have one point only. They are testing him. They are proving him. Get out of this one. Now the trouble is, he's being tested on 3 fronts. If he condemns her, he loses face to all those that had heard him say, "I have been sent to save, not to condemn." He's going to lose face with those that called him friend, the friend of sinners, the friend of publicans, the friend of those that are broken and shattered. He has, if he condemns them, he has lost face with them. With that as well, if he condemns them, he pits himself against Roman law. Because under Roman law, the Jews had no power nor authority to put anyone to death. And so he would be pitted against the Roman authority. Because it was up to them whether or not you live or die with the movement of the thumb or the whatever it is they used to do. And so he's pitted in a number of directions. If he condemns her, those that love him will say, well, surely you've come to save. It's a bit of a difficulty, isn't it? In what we say with the Prime Minister at the moment. He suggests that Big Ben should be run. Then all of a sudden he withdraws. For some reason, there's some reason why he can't be done. And so Jesus will be caught in a similar situation. Because if he says one thing, he can't prosecute. He can't execute it at all. And then he's tested on another area. If he fails to condemn her, if he just brushes it under the carpet, then they can rightly turn around and say, well, you are undermining the law of Moses. They're testing him on three fronts. They're sure they've got him. But I wonder if he's prayed this prayer that St. Francis of Assisi penned. Make me a channel of your peace. And all those things that he prayed in that prayer that's been turned into a hymn, I wonder if he prayed that up on the mountain. And the atmosphere that had been so beautiful suddenly changes into a venomous and accusing atmosphere. And so suddenly now, he is stood, he is welcomed in, the interruption that has come. And then it says in verse 6, and Jesus stooped. He went back down again. And he wrote on the ground with his finger. A funny old thing to do. I don't know if when you write on the ground in the dirt or in the soil, it's very difficult to see what's being written. But that's what it says he did. He wrote with his finger. Now, that same finger, Jesus speaking to a great group of people one time, he says, listen now, if I by the finger of God cast out devils, then know that the kingdom of God is at hand. This finger of his could do a little bit of damage today. We find in the Old Testament, we find in the Old Testament, the book of Exodus, chapter 31, it says, and the Lord gave the 2 tablets of stone to Moses, which he had written with the finger of God. He'd engraved those tablets of stone with his own finger, not Moses' finger, but with God's finger. Later on in the Old Testament, there's another book, the book of Daniel. And it says in Daniel chapter 5, when there was a great party going on, there was lots of drink around, there were celebrations, and it seems as they weren't paralytic, but they were what we would call, I suppose, half-cut. And when you're half-cut, you can get yourself in trouble. Things just don't seem to be as they once were. And so what you would never have laughed at before, at half-cut, you laugh. Things that you would never say sober, at half-cut, you say it. Things that you would never do when you're sober, when you're half-cut, you're prone to do it. And this man, Belshazzar, we're told that he brought out the vessels of God's house, and he poured wine into them and used those vessels as celebrations of his idolatrous feast. And then it says this, and the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Persian words. You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. This finger of God, it seems able to bring a charge against people. Whilst we know the law wasn't written to condemn, we know ultimately that the law of Moses does one thing. It concludes that the whole world is guilty before God. It brings a charge against the whole world. It doesn't matter who we are, who you are. The law has this unwanted ability, as far as we are concerned, in that when we pair ourselves up against it, it does but one thing: condemn us. You know, the personal charge that was brought against Belshazzar was that you've been weighed in the balances and now you're found wanting, Belshazzar. That night we find that Belshazzar's life ended. When the Persian or the Medo-Persians came and took over the city of Babylon, this finger of God. And Jesus stooped and wrote on the ground with his finger. That word wrote, it's not the normal term when they write, if you understand what I mean. It can be translated into this: to bring a charge against. That's very interesting, isn't it? He wrote on the ground with his finger and brought charges against them. Now, whether they could identify what's been written on the ground, I don't know. That's not for me to answer in that regard. But that's what he did. He brought charges against them. The thing is, I could remember when I was with one particular boy in my year in school, and if you crossed him, it was hassle all the time. He just would not give up until he caught him. He was in Chris Taylor's school. You know what it would be then, Chris, I would imagine. And if you crossed him, he'd wait at the top end of the street for you 2 o'clock in the morning and confront him. When he was in his teens, he was an actor. And you think sometimes someone's having a crack at him, and I used to think, don't go down that road now. And these Pharisees, he's writing on the ground, bringing charges against them. And in verse 7 it says, and they continued to ask him. And you just think, someone would just say, listen now, don't go down this road because you're going to get yourself in trouble by that. Not with fisticuffs, I don't mean that. But you're going to find yourself spoilt in this situation here if you're not careful. And so it says in verse 7 that they continued to ask him. And he had stooped down again by this point and said to them, he that is without sin, let him cast the first stone. Now the problem for us is this: what does he mean, he that is without sin? Because the Old Testament concludes that every man, every woman, everyone is born under sin. So it doesn't make sense that he that is without sin, let him cast the first stone. Because if we just say, if that's the case, then there's no room in any way at all to make any judgments in life. If that's the criteria for judgment, the criteria or the ministry or part of the ministry of the priesthood was this, that they would have to make judgments. There would be men standing on the door of the temple or on the door of the tabernacle that had ability to make judgments. They called them doorkeepers. And they could give yea or nay as to whether or not you went into the temple to worship God. If they found that your offering was at fault, if it was in any way at all damaged, or if it was any way at all second-hand, so to speak, they could stop you going. So it doesn't make sense to say, he that is without sin, let him cast the first stone. It can't be that they're sinful people. It can't be that. Because their job was to make judgments. So what is he saying? It's very difficult to try and work your way through it. I looked at different ones, and William Barclay comes up with this, that the phraseology that he uses seems to insist that it's not the case of sins that we're talking about, but a particular sin. In fact, the sin of this lady, as far as he was concerned, the sin of adultery. And what he infers in this statement, he that is without sin, let him cast the first stone among you. It cannot be because they're sinners. Doesn't make sense. Because someone somewhere in the government of Israel, in the government of Rome, has to make decisions, has to make judgments of whether it's right or wrong. It can't be that. It has to be more personal. It has to be more appertaining to this particular situation. And so we find with the Master, he says, he that is without this sin amongst you, let him cast the first stone. Oh, this is embarrassing. This suddenly now makes sense. This is an embarrassing one. Here were members of the Sanhedrin Council. Here were the Pharisees, who were the separated ones. Here were the Sadducees, who were the liberals, the moderates. And what he's saying to them, remember on the mountain when he taught the Sermon on the Mount, never mind about committing the act, having it within your heart is more than enough. And so we find with the Lord Jesus that his challenge, he's now moved from stooping on the ground and he's standing and he says, he that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. His word goes deep. There are times when he can speak to your heart, and the person next to you it can be like almost like water upon a duck's back. But for you, it can speak right into your soul. I remember when Samuel was there, and David had committed his act of deceit, his act of murder, his act of adultery, he'd done so many things. And Samuel challenged him and said to him, do you know, David, he gave a little parable. There was a stranger that came into the land, and there was this wealthy man who had everything before him. And when it came to a time to celebrate for the stranger that came into the land, he didn't take one of his own sheep. He took one of the flock of a poor member of the nation of Israel. David, losing all sense of understanding, of all sense of kindness and goodness, he begins and turns and says, well, we'll have him, we'll sort him out. Samuel turns and says to David, but David, I'll point to Neil now, but just to illustrate, you're the man. It's you. As the old Negro spiritual used to say, it's not the deacon, Lord, but it's me that's standing in the need of prayer. And his words cut deep. And then he goes on to say in the next verse, I'm beginning at the eldest. They've got so much to lose. Reputation. Beginning at the eldest, being convicted by their own conscience. Do you know God has given us, every one of us, a conscience? To know what's right, what's wrong. And we find here, each one, beginning at the eldest, being convicted by their own conscience, left the arena. And Jesus has gone back down again and writing on the floor. Continued writing. He's up and down all the time. And as they've all left, from the oldest to the youngest, they all make their way back to where they came from. Jesus stands again. In Psalm 68, there's a psalm there that they used to read when they brought the Ark of God into the tabernacle. And when they brought it into the temple, it was a permanent residence in the temple, so it was just a one-off. But this is how Psalm 68 starts. Let God arise, and let his enemies be scattered. And here we find the Christ of God stands to his feet. I don't know how tall he was. I would imagine he's 5 foot something. And he stands to his feet. Let God arise, and let his enemies be scattered. But the lovely thing with it as well, not only his enemies, but the venom is scattered. The fear, well, not yet, because she still doesn't know what's going to happen. And he stands to his feet and says to her, where are all your accusers gone? It's a bit like that song in the 70s and the 60s. Where have all the flowers gone? Where have all the young people gone? Where have all your accusers gone? Has no one condemned you? No one, Lord. How did she know about him being Lord? Oh, in the midst of deep adversity, things can come to your heart that was not there before. No man has condemned me, Lord. And he looks and says to her, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. They couldn't condemn her because there was no witnesses now. To condemn, you have to have witnesses. But the witnesses have scattered. Under the law, she's free to go. Because there's no one there to condemn her. So he's not bending truth. He's not playing a game of saying, well, that's it. That mercy might come in. Mercy and truth have met together. In an insolvable situation, he brings the solution. How can we try and sort out the poor lady and the woman of Samaria, 5 times married, and the man she's now living with is her 6th partner? Imagine the children that were in that household that had different surnames if they were born today. Imagine the complexity of that house. We're not told how he sorted that out. He sorted her out first. When I say sorted out, I don't mean took her to task. Her life was changed. And this woman, who had come with fear and with hopefully shame, when she was thrust into the midst of this group of people that had been enjoying the testimony of Jesus, suddenly the atmosphere changed. She's standing there trembling, waiting for that first break to hit her. Where are your accusers gone? Has no one condemned you? No one's condemned me, Lord. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Let's throw a pebble in the pond. What if he turned around and said, go and sin no more, and I won't condemn you? That's a different story. Grace, 'tis a charming sound, harmonious to the ear. I wish I could remember words. That. Saved by grace alone. This is all my plea. Jesus died for all mankind, and Jesus died for me. If he'd said, go and sin no more, and I won't condemn you, she's finished. But if he says, I don't condemn you, there's been enough condemnation, he said. Enough pointed finger, enough furrowed brow, enough of an eye looking on the corner there just to see what's going. Enough of that. I've come to save. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Do you know, I think in those words, go and sin no more, was the very power to see her through life. You see, what a carrot to dangle in front of someone. If it was go and sin no more, but if you fail mine, it'll come back worse and bite you. And then that's what he said to the man that was healed. Sin no more, lest the worst thing come upon you. We see concerning this, I don't condemn you. Now mercy and truth have met together. And they're comfortable. Have you ever been in company sometimes and you're not comfortable? And you move about on the chair? And you look all over the room? Mercy and truth. In one sense, in our world, so opposite to each other. In the world of God, He can bring truth. I think Anita said in a poem that he gives you medicine sometimes, but it does you so much good. He poured in the oil and the wine. When I cut my knee doing your hedge, I remember. And I went up there, I've never the world's greatest, and we were in A&E, I was in A&E. And the knee, the skin would fold over like, so the nurse just went like that. You can see my kneecap like, and it didn't hurt. Not until she put this stuff in. She said, oh, you might feel something by you. She poured this stuff in. But he poured in the oil and the wine. You say, but Mark, will you drop Dorothy Jones? Say it again. And when she's 16 years of age, converted, how long will this last? She said to her. 6 months. This is the secret of it now. Listen now, verse 12. Then Jesus spoke to them again. He turns to them all now. All the Sadducees and Pharisees have been gone, and the original group is there together. And he turns to them all and he said, let this be a lesson to you now. The situation that we've got. Let it be a lesson. I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. What he would have been doing at this time, there were 2 huge candelabras put into the temple courtyard. It's at this feast that's going on now. And it lit up that whole area. And it was concerned the light of God. It's an expression of that pillar of fire that led them through the wilderness in the night. The light of God. And he said, I'm the light of the world. He that follows me shall no longer walk in darkness. Can't get past that part in your life that just doesn't seem to change. Follow the light. Not the light, follow him. And you'll find yourself coming into more and more light. I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. Mercy and truth, they've met together. Righteousness and peace, they kissed each other. Thank God that he uses those phrases to show us the way forward. Not to drag us by the collar, by the skin of our teeth, but to lift us up into blessedness. Wonderful thing that he can do. Thank you for your patience.